We're still on definitive statement paragraphs. Now, instead of using a negative form of a statement, here we're using a contrary. No matter what form of contrast you use, whether you use a negative exclusion or a positive inclusion, both have the effect of giving a closer definition of the main idea you're trying to convey, the main thought, the main topic of your paragraph. When things are contrasted, we see them more clearly. We define ideas more accurately when we contrast it with something else, and when it's negative or contrary is stated. In this piece by Kingsley, he gives the topic statement in details. We all know how beautiful and noble modesty is, how we all admire it, how it raises a man in our eyes to see him afraid of boasting, never showing off, never pushing himself forward. And now the contrary is stated. Whenever, on the other hand, we see in wise and good men any vanity, boasting, arrogance of any kind, we call it a weakness in them and are sorry to see them lowering themselves by the least need of divine modesty. So this is an example of using a contrary. Here are two more examples. In the first, by Drummond, he makes a topic statement and then he repeats a sentence to clarify it and make it more specific. The peculiarity of ill temper is that it is the vice of the virtuous. It is often the one blot on an otherwise noble character. And now he gives the particulars. You know men who are all but perfect, and women who would be entirely perfect, but for an easily ruffled, quick-tempered, or touchy disposition. In the next example, the topic statement will be repeated and then particularized. There are few delights in any life so high and rare as a subtle and strong delight of sovereign art and poetry. There are none more pure and more sublime, repeated and particularized. To have read the greatest work of any great poet, to have beheld or heard the greatest works of any great painter or musician, is a possession added to the best things of life. Now, we can see the parallel or balanced structure in these statements. For example, in the second paragraph, to have read the greatest works of any great poet, to have beheld or heard the greatest works of any great painter. So there's a similar syntax there, as we talked about in the last video. And finally, we're going to look at an example of definitive statements using contrast and an example. And there's a balanced structure here. Mannerism is pardonable and is sometimes even agreeable when the manner, though vicious, is natural. Now here's the example. Few readers, for example, would be willing to part with the mannerisms of Milton or Burke. And now the contrary. But a mannerism which does not sit easy on the mannerist, which has been adopted on principle and which can be sustained only by constant effort, is always offensive. So there's an antithesis there. Mannerism is pardonable, that's in the first sentence. And the last, describing how it is offensive. And such is the mannerism of Johnson. That's a second example. So there's a topic statement, an example, a contrary statement, and an example. So these are ways you can develop a definitive paragraph.